Hello and welcome to the MyGov Budget Talks with NITI Aayog. In a first-of-its-kind attempt to interact directly with the public, the Government of India's premier policy think tank, NITI Aayog, is organizing live interactions with the public on the union budget. For 2 days, live interactions will take place with the Vice Chairman, Dr. Arvind Panagariya, and the CEO, Mr. Amitabh Kant, on the union budget, where the premier policy think tank of the government will seek to answer questions that are being posed by citizens on the union budget, while also trying to explain the implications of the union budget to the common man by using these questions. For this, we have with us Dr. Arvind Panagariya, the Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog and noted economist. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. So, over the last 2 days since the release of the budget, we've been getting a lot of questions from the public, from the media, through different social media platforms. So, we'll begin this hangout first by answering one or two general questions that have been repeated consistently to us. First of these questions, sir, people want to know how this budget is different from the previous two budgets that have been presented by this government.
Okay, so I think the way to think of it is that there is a bit of continuity across the budgets. In the previous budgets, focused more sort of on industry. So we had, issues of bankruptcy, issues of corporate taxation, etc. in the last budget. This budget goes and focuses much more squarely on the rural economy.
Okay.
So we have here focus on irrigation, we have focus on rural electrification, focus on building rural roads. What affects the rural India the most is what is at the center of this budget. And this is completely appropriate because this is where not only 70% of Indians actually live, but it is also where about 80% of India's poor people live.
Right.
So the focus, so what distinguishes this budget is it's a very, very heavy focus on rural economy of India.
Okay. Now that you say that this budget is one which has a focus on rural economy, that has also been one of the very strong criticisms that has come. And people say that this budget is simply aping the UPA budget. So how do you answer that? And what do you say about that?
Well, I think, there are 2 or 3 ways I should try to answer that. One, in terms of the objectives, I think there are shared objectives across the spectrum in India, which is to eradicate poverty. So anything that impacts the poor such that we help the poor and eradicate poverty is generally shared by all parts or on both aisles of the parliament, let's say. And so certainly you would always find, particularly with the social programs, some bit of agreement. So that's one thing which I would say, but there are other issues here which we ought to be aware of, which distinguish the present government from the previous one.
Okay.
One of the hallmarks, I think, of this government has been that it has taken no steps which later sort of we come back and say this was a wrong step, we ought to reverse it.
Okay.
For example, the previous government introduced the Land Acquisition Act, which I think, there's a lot of debate in the press that, this is something that's going to hurt the country's progress and growth. Likewise, the retrospective taxation that happened, the present budget, as well as what preceded it, none of what the present government has done in either this or the previous 2 budgets has anything that would require reversing. So there has been a well thought out strategy, and the government is moving steadily following that strategy, and various areas are being in the process covered. So there is a clear direction, and also one further, I think, distinguishing feature of the way the present government is doing things is that generally it is going for empowerment of the poor rather than mostly for entitlement. So building rural roads, rural electrification, acceleration on both of those fronts, that actually empowers the poor.
Okay.
They can access the markets, they can access electricity, so they can figure out what is good for them. Okay. So that has been the approach. So it's not quite identical to what the previous.
So you say that it's very well thought out and it's more towards empowering and not towards entitlement. So in that it's different from the UPA budget. Okay.
Yes.
So now we have a couple of questions that have been coming, sir, for over the last 2 days since the release of the budget from lots of people across the country. So I've tried to shortlist a couple of them and take them. So first of them is from Miss Mishra in Bombay. She wants to ask us if this budget really spells an end in the era of fiscal planning with the end of the non-plan and plan distinction. And what then happens to economic planning? And what is NITI's role in this?
So what we have so far is an announcement by the finance minister in the budget speech that the distinction that we have made for several decades now, probably 6+ decades, between planned expenditures and non-planned expenditures will be eliminated starting a year after the current fiscal year into which we are about to enter. So 16-17 will be the last year when the distinction between planned and non-planned expenditures is maintained. Then we will merge all expenditures. There will be no such distinction made. Okay. This, of course, 16-17 year, the last year of this distinction also coincides, not by accident, but by design, with the last year of the 12th 5-year plan. So when the government had come to power, the decision had been made that last 2 years of the 12th plan will be used as transition. So we'll complete that plan, and then we'll look to where we go from there. So one direction seems to be reasonably clear, that perhaps we'll not be doing now 5-year plans. Okay. What will replace it, I think that's still under discussion. So we have to wait and see. No decision in this regard has been made. One possibility is to introduce some sort of medium-term fiscal framework planning. In which, if that is done, then this will entail getting some sense of predicting, over the next 2 or 3 years what the revenues are likely to be, how these expenditures will, how the then resulting expenditures will be allocated across different ministries, and then a year later, you roll it further up the next 3 years. But in this, you then also try to see that the ministries deliver, meaning that if the ministries are being allocated a certain sum, there has to be some sense of a responsibility as to what they are going to deliver, and at the end of the year, some assessment of whether the delivery happened or not, and if it did not, then what accounts for it.
So then, who will undertake this monitoring exercise, and what will NITI's role be in this whole planning system?
So I think in the end, if this is the road that's taken, so we don't know yet whether this is the road that will be taken. But if this is the road that's taken, then NITI Aayog will be the obvious sort of agency to mediate this, because in the end, finance ministry deals with the finances. The other ministries actually deal with the action. But somebody who is a sort of outside of both of those must do the planning of the expenditures, the work plan, etc. And moreover, very importantly, also ex post assessment of whether the delivery took place or not. NITI Aayog is the obvious agency.
So it will provide policy support and also monitor the implementation. Yes. Okay, all right. And we have a question, an interesting question from Bangalore, from Mohit Rao, who is asking us if the government spending as the ratio of the GDP is on the decline. If it is, then why? Why is it on the decline?
So in the central government budget, which is what I think Mohit seems to be referring to, is correct that as a percentage, as a proportion of the GDP, the central government spending has been declining. The expenditure has been declining. So it was about 15.8% of the GDP in 2009-10. Since then, it has been largely steadily on the declining path. 15-16, we are going to end up at about 12.6%. So it is lower. Principally, I think the reason has been the fiscal consolidation. Our fiscal deficit was much larger. Just the central government fiscal deficit was larger in 2009-10. It was 6.5%. We are down in 15-16 to 3.9. So bulk of the decline in the expenditure as a proportion of GDP is really accounted for by greater fiscal consolidation. What that means is that we have not been as successful at raising revenues.
Okay.
And we have to actually do a better job of raising revenues. We do need to widen the tax base. We do need to make a greater effort. Also, non-tax revenues, we have to find ways to raise those. As you know, I mean, nobody likes to be taxed, and the governments, therefore, are very cautious when they raise taxes or if they expand the tax base. So somebody was not paying taxes has to now pay taxes. So I think that's a harder task, and so often, any fiscal consolidation, its burden ends up falling on the expenditure. It's not altogether a good thing.
Okay, so I mean, if we're talking about generating revenues for the government, this budget does talk about levying certain cesses, the Krishi cess, for instance, in order to be able to generate some revenue. And we have a question on that from Mr. Amog in Bijapur in Karnataka, who's asking us if levying cess then won't dent consumption. Won't this dent the consumption in the economy? Isn't that a problem if you're generating revenues through cess?
No, this is a complicated question, and so it is only an economist can really see through it. So it all depends on who is paying the cess, right? So if somebody very wealthy is paying the cess, that perhaps is not something which would have gone into consumption in the first place, because for the very wealthy, only a small part of the income actually gets consumed.
True.
Right. So, as a dramatic example, if you think, whatever Mr. Mukesh Ambani's income is today, the expenditure has got to be far, far smaller than that.
Okay.
So in that case, it's not coming out of consumption. And in fact, when the cess is actually spent, it actually raises at least the demand in some way. Right. So suppose cess is used for some agricultural program, in this case, Krishi cess. It's going to end up in somebody's hands, and consumption will actually be boosted. So it really depends,
Okay.
Who pays that cess, and then in whose hands the cess goes.
Okay. So this cess then actually allows a certain section of the population to maybe increase their, consumption.
Absolutely, it can.
Right. So, another question following that on cess is by Dooli Chand, who's asking us if collective revenue through cess, when it's not shared with state governments, which is not happening, isn't that against cooperative federalism? And given that NITI is promoting cooperative federalism as its key mandate, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as stated, I suppose Dooli Chand is right, but there are a couple of reasons why the cesses are levied. Sometimes you want to just protect a particular expenditure, right? So you want to build roads. You want to make sure that the revenues would be available for building roads. And if then you are counting only or principally on general revenues, competing interests can sometimes kind of crowd you out. When you levy a cess, it is clear that that cess has to be used for that particular purpose. The other reason is that often cess is levied for expenditures on items that are temporary items of expenditure. So there is some sense that it is going to be it is going to be a temporary measure, and it will then be withdrawn after a certain time period. As actually in this budget, in fact, the finance minister did withdraw a number of different cesses, which were raising less than 50 crore of revenues. So those are the two reasons. As a matter of good kind of economics and good budgeting, etc., economists certainly lean very heavily in terms of relying on general budget and therefore revenues that are raised by regular taxes rather than cesses. So economists generally, because honestly, the expenditures and revenues ought to be separated as a matter of principle, rather than being totally connected that whatever this revenue comes will contribute to only this expenditure. So that sort of links the revenues and expenditures, and economists generally advise against it. But for many times for practical purposes and to ensure a particular, to basically protect a particular expenditure item, cesses get used.
That particular focus, to create that focus. Oh, so there's also been a lot of cesses that have been removed this budget from.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
okay.
The finance minister announced in the budget, I think, they've been, over the years, these have accumulated, and then nobody took a look back, what those cesses are doing. And many of these cesses were not raising large amount of revenue.
So then they were done away with this.
They were done away with.
Okay. Another question is on how the direct benefit transfers for fertilizers, which is now being rolled out as a pilot. How do you think this will work out? Suchita asks us, and what is the rationale behind this move?
Yeah. So I think the ultimate way. So this is going to be a pilot. We still have to wait and see how it rolls out. But ideally, the way it should work is I think what I can tell you, because I'm not sure right now. I mean, this will have to be in practice how exactly we will end up carrying out that pilot. But in the end, how we want to do it, we should be able to do it. Is that ultimately we should know what is the acreage of a particular farmer, so that we roughly know what is the fertilizer requirement of the farmer. And then, just as in LPG, the farmer therefore has an entitlement to get that fertilizer, that quantity of fertilizer at a subsidized price. So the farmer will come in, pay the full price as we do in LPG cylinders, but then the difference between the subsidized price and the market price that he or she would pay would be then credited to the bank account. So this is the direct benefit transfer given on the fertilizer purchase. What this will do is, today there is no verification who is buying how much. So lot more fertilizer gets bought at the subsidized price, and then the buyer actually needs, and then a good bit of this quantity then gets diverted either into the black market, or sometimes it also ends up crossing the border to our neighboring countries, because the price that prevails in those countries or neighboring countries and the subsidized price, there is a large gap.
So you see this as a way of streamlining what's...
Streamlining, cutting out a lot of the black marketing in this, and so forth.
All right. Another question that's being asked is by Lakshmiksha Shetty, who's asking us if imposing penalty on tax transgressors and not giving them an impunity from imprisonment, do you think that will actually enhance tax payments?
So look, I think, this is this particular provision allows taxpayers who did not report some of part of their incomes in their filings previously to come forward, reveal it, pay the tax plus some 7.5% penalty and 7.5% Kisan cess, and basically get a clean sheet on this. The alternative would be for the tax authorities to sort of go after anybody who did not pay. First of all, it's going to be hard actually to discover who those people are, because if it is income which has not been reported, how do you know who to whom that income accrued in the first place? And for a sort of crime like this to create a kind of atmosphere of fear is probably a lot less attractive than to give this option for one time. It's good for revenues, it's good for the taxpayer to come clean, and there are a lot of taxpayers actually sometimes because of the uncertainty and lack of clarity fail to report it, later realize that this was to be reported, and then they don't know what to do with it because they may get prosecuted for it. So I think there is a good argument for it. Periodically this has been done by the different governments. So I mean, I think this is
a way to at least try and get them on board and get them to pay.
The money comes back into circulation, and the government gets its tax revenue with some penalty as well. So I think it's a sort of win-win, I would say.
Okay, we've actually got a question from a viewer live, Niladri Chakrabarti, who's asking us, can India achieve 8% growth under such a gloomy environment? What do you think?
Well, I say come out of it. Come out of your gloom.
Okay.
India grew in the year, this last year that we are completing, 2015-16. The advanced estimate of growth rate for the fourth quarter of this year that we are about to complete is 7.8%.
So we're almost
We are very
getting there.
close, we are almost there. If ultimately the advanced estimate is validated by the Central Statistical Organization, then we are almost there. So this sense of gloom our press kind of spreads, let's say, is based on stress among certain sectors of the economy.
Okay.
There's stress was inherited from certain sectors of the economy. Steel, you remember, the construction industry. I mean, these are the industries which then contributed to all the non-performing assets, the NPAs of the banks, etc. But there is a large section of the economy which is healthy, which is growing. Auto parts doing very well. You look at the air transportation, which has really shot up very recently in this last year, and services sectors. So there are a large number of sectors, even within actually industry manufacturing, there's many sectors which are actually doing quite well. So don't go by the gloom of some sectors which actually themselves behave to some degree, contributing to these NPAs, etc. This, bad news makes good flashes in the media, and so the media, often, right? I mean, good news is no news, so media kind of downplays the good news.
Okay, that's actually in line with the one or two questions that I've already shortlisted for this. Was one of Mukesh asks as if India Inc. and growth have actually will they take a hit with the stated focus on rural economy? Will they take a hit? Will growth take a hit?
No. So as I said, one should see this budget as a third budget of the government, and it exhibits some continuity, meaning that there's a set of things that the government wanted to accomplish. Many of the things that relate to industry got announced either in the previous budget or outside of the budget. Many the Make in India programs, the Startup India program, the reforms that many of the states are doing in labor area, for example, the reforms that the central government itself did actually through opening up to foreign investment in insurance wider, from 26 to 49%, in defense also it's now gone to 49%. So railways have been open to foreign investment. So one should see this as a continuity that we had not done enough on agriculture and rural economy in the previous budget and
so
years.
This budget is trying
so
to.
This budget really then and also remember that because of the bad monsoons in the last 2 years, there was greater stress in the rural economy. So that also is a reason. But above all, of course, the biggest reason is that 80% of the poor are in rural India. So there is every reason to pay a great deal of attention to the rural economy. But that does not amount to the government having actually ignored the industry and services.
Okay. No, so that also raised the question as to why then does the Sensex immediately just drop when there's announcement as to this sector?
First, in fairness, when the markets closed, the movement was about 0.5%, if I remember correctly, in Sensex. So it's not a large, that 0.5% movement can happen on any given day. That's number one. Number two, what you see in Sensex is a very short-term reaction, immediate, reaction to some kind of news and all. If anything, 0.5% movement really doesn't amount to, reaction one the other way. But besides, I think what we have to see is that, in the longer term, how does the Sensex move for the next year? That's what we have to look at.
Okay. Another question that we've got, sir, is on the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. And they're asking us if this Yojana is, say, as the budget says, is meant to create jobs. How is this different from NREGA? How is the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana different from NREGA?
No. Remember that NREGA basically gives each rural household 100 days worth of employment. It guarantees or offers up to 100 days worth of employment for one member of the household per year. Gram Sadak Yojana is more about building roads. So it really is a scheme to connect every village to the nearest urban center, wherever the highways, etc. are. So I really think that this is a very important undertaking. Of course, this was originally introduced by NDA-1 government under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. UPA continued it. So by the way, here is one very clear example where the UPA actually did what NDA had started.
Okay, so it's not just this government.
I mean, in the system there is some bit
There's
of
a
continuity remains, so which is a good thing, not a bad thing. But we shouldn't take it negatively.
Okay.
But so Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is about actually a vast amount of roads have been built up. Actually, the amount of connectivity that has happened of the rural, of the villages to the nearby towns and cities is just astonishing. Actually, I mean, now we should check the numbers. I don't have the numbers on me, but it's in now tens of thousands of kilometers that have been built up. And that, I think, is true empowerment for the people. That's true empowerment for the people, because that way they can then help themselves.
Yeah.
And particularly also when put together with the access to electricity. I think that's the other thing we really need to do. And the third, of course, we also need to replace the current fuel in cooking, because principally women are doing the cooking in the rural households, as in many of the urban households too. And there, currently the biofuels, etc., they use is incredibly harmful to their health. It easily takes away 5 to 7 years of life out of anybody who continuously does cooking using the traditional chula, where you use these cow dung cakes or kande, as they are called. So we also therefore need to bring in the LPG or some or electric cooktops or something.
So this would also help.
Which really health-wise, that's a huge thing. But these are the major kind of things which really largely coming back to your original question on rural roads. I think that's a means to empower the people.
Okay. All right. Another live question that has come is from Zunzar Patil, who's asking us what the parameters are for planning and selecting urban clusters, and will the government ask for public participation in this?
Sorry, sir.
The rural and urban clusters, will government ask for public participation in shortlisting these clusters, in planning for these clusters? What are the parameters on which these will be?
So public as well as the private entities, they will all be welcome in making a success of the mission. Generally, the government encourages, right? I mean, even in go back to the building of the toilets, right, across the country. It is very welcome if the public will join hands, but also, a lot of the corporations have come forward as a part of their social CSR spending, the 2% of profits that they are expected to spend on the CSR, using that, to build toilets, etc. So this is really in that spirit. So yes, I think public participation is going to be very welcome. And really, without public participation, you cannot succeed in something like it. I mean, it's like, in Swachh Bharat, how do you succeed without public participating?
I mean, I think the question also meant in selecting them. Will you sort of ask people, how do you go about selecting these, or how will these selections be made?
Okay, so that we have to wait and see.
Okay.
But I think states will have to play an important role in that.
So there will be state level participation, and then
certainly everything gets done at the level of the state.
Okay, all right. So coming to state governments, then we have a question by R.K. Agarwal, who's asking us, how is the centre going to ensure that the programs of the budget are implemented in the state governments, considering that now the move is more towards giving freedom to states and devolving more funds to states? How will we ensure that states actually do implement the programs of the budget?
Okay. So one model is the model where the central government is the patronizing government. The other is that it's more liberal government. And generally, I think the movement now has been towards letting the states kind of do many of the things, the greater independence for the states. And very remarkably, actually, now the states have emerged as incredibly responsible entities. And that is also connected to the future success of the chief ministers to actually win their offices again. Unlike in the earlier decades where the same party kind of gets voted again and again, it's not today. If you don't deliver, you're bundled out. I think aspirational India is here now, and if the politicians don't deliver, they get voted out. So in effect, I think in our states now are run by chief ministers who are very aware of this phenomenon, and partly that phenomenon is itself the result of the very high growth that we experienced for almost a decade, about 8% or so, starting from 2003-4. So then the people began to see that if the politicians do good things, their fortunes can change for the better within less than a generation. Whereas in the past, you went, generation after generation, hardly anything changed. So, fatalism usually would take over that, ki chalo aisa hi chalta hai, ye to desh mein aisa hi chalta hai. And so you voted the same government back again and again, as if there was no relationship between what the government was doing and the fortunes that the people were subject to. But today, people realize it, that, what the government does immediately impacts their prospects of better or worse lives, and as a result they bundle out. So therefore I think there is a case to be made for states taking greater responsibility, because they are responsible states. But having said all that, I think central government certainly is not going back on its responsibilities. There is a lot of there are a lot of areas where you got shared goals.
The centrally sponsored schemes.
And therefore, exactly, those centrally sponsored schemes that we have are precisely in areas on subjects that are shared goals, which are then implemented across the states. And clearly, NITI Aayog then is actually involved in monitoring many the centrally sponsored schemes to see that the schemes do get implemented. We also try to see that the states get the share of expenditures that center is supposed to provide to the states. So on both ends, we look at as a part of our monitoring and evaluation function. So the center will remain involved, but certainly now there is a greater move towards cooperative federalism rather than confrontational, federalism. So greater responsibility lies with the states.
Okay. So I think with that we've run out of time as well. So I think we'll close this discussion here. And we invite citizens to participate with us tomorrow in our discussions, live interactions with Mr. Amitabh Kant, the CEO of NITI Aayog, who will also take questions on the union budget tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.